Hey, everybody, welcome to Chart Chat, and where we are going to discuss the intersection of music and data with our guest, Chris Dallariva. Play that funky music. Welcome, everybody, to Chart Chat, where we discuss the good, the bad, the screaming cats, whatever that is, of data visualization. My name is Steve Wexler. I'm the founder, principal, and chief chart looker adder at Data Revelations, and delighted to be joined by my fellow authors and our guest. Well, we'll mention the guest in a little bit, but let me hand things over now. Andy, if you would introduce yourself.
Yeah, this is exciting. My name is Andy Cotgreave. I am the founder of a new company called How to Speak Data. Ho, hot off the press. And I'm coming to you live from Belgrade in Serbia, where I've been keynoting and telling people about the history of analytics at Data Science Conference Europe. So hi, everybody. Great to be here.
Jeff Schaefer here from the University of Cincinnati, where I'm a professor of data analytics and AI. I'm the director of the Applied AI Lab. Amanda?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda McCulloch. I'm a data viz designer based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I spend my time working mainly on public health data visualizations. I'm also a founding board member of the Global Data Visualization Society and excited to dive in with Chris today. So, Steve, back over to you.
And Chris, if you could just a little bit about yourself, but we're going to do a lot of bit about yourself in a little bit.
Yeah, my name is Chris Dallariva. I live in Hoboken, New Jersey. I work for the music streaming service Audiomack on data analytics, personalization, and outside of work, I'm known for writing about music and data. I have a pretty popular newsletter called Can't Get Much Higher, and I just released a book last week, my first book called Uncharted Territory: What Numbers Tell Us About the Biggest Hit Songs and Ourselves. And that is mostly, I think, what we're going to be talking about, but I think we're going to touch on a couple other things too.
Oh, and that is going to be kind of the centerpiece of our discussion. And let me cue things up a little bit. So this is not Beatles 65. It is Chart Chat 65. Hard to believe it, but we started this 7 years ago, almost to the day. And this is our 65th round or episode. And I'm happy that it celebrates the intersection or confluence of music and data, because it is, in fact, I think 11 years ago that I first discovered Jeffrey Schaefer, a colleague, friend, and now co-author and co-host of Chart Chat, when he published this sumptuous and stunning data visualization. I don't know if you can see it at the top, but it says Music Major and Data Minor. And in particular, couldn't help but focus on this, I think the first successful sand key ever built in Tableau. But I remember seeing this thing and thinking, oh my goodness, here's someone who revels or celebrates data and data visualization and music. I have to meet this person. And it's led to a wonderful collaboration. So here's our agenda for our get-together. First, we're going to meet Chris Dallariva and discuss what he does at Audiomack. Then we're going to look at some fascinating findings from his book, Uncharted Territory, which has been a blast for me. I know Andy was waxing eloquent about how much he has enjoyed it, and how on earth you decided to take this project on, because it is a massive undertaking. Then the four of us are going to share four of our favorite music-related or music-inspired data visualizations, and a little bit more. I had a teaser here, which is there is one Billboard Top 100 #1 song that includes both accordion and banjo. Which song is it? And be warned, once you see it, you will not get the tune out of your head if you're familiar with it. Also, what is this thingy that's on top of the cover of the book? And it did make a prominent appearance in a great pop song. And Chris, you've got a lot of explaining to do here about this one, where you make the assertion that Paul McCartney's Silly Love Songs is one of the most fun songs you'll ever hear. As is our tendency, or in any of our presentations and certainly chart chats, you are encouraged to join the debate. You can either type in comments and we will moderate them and put them on the screen. Thank you very much, Wiz Gidget, and my colleague for sharing that. But also, we will have the after party. It is an informal Zoom meeting where you can ask questions of our guest and express your own opinions. Before we delve in to things, I want to do a shout out to Alex Selby Boothroyd, who is the head of data journalism at The Economist. It was his post on LinkedIn that led me to discover Chris and his book. So he's indirectly responsible for this chart chat. He is directly responsible for one of my favorite chart chats with data journalist Rosamund Pierce. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Alex. And now let's get into, let's meet Chris. And Chris, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you, I mean, you've got a lot of history, but why don't you tell us a little bit about AudioMac and what you do there?
Yeah, out of college, I studied math and economics in college, and out of college, I worked in antitrust consulting, which I know a lot of people, or worked in economic consulting, which I know is big for a lot of economics graduates. Did that for a couple of years, and then in 2019, I ended up getting a job here at AudioMac. AudioMac is a music streaming service. I mean, if you have streamed music somewhere, you would be familiar with the experience on AudioMac, though it is more in the vein of something like SoundCloud than Spotify, in that people can upload directly to AudioMac. So, we have a lot of kid in their bedroom, first time uploading music, they'll come to AudioMac as a place to put that music. Of course, we also have all of the biggest records and almost anything you could want to hear. But our biggest markets are in Africa, in the Caribbean, across Africa, especially in Western Africa. We're the most popular streaming service. I was brought on specifically as AudioMac's first data analyst. They were growing quickly, generating tons and tons of data, and they needed someone to sift through it all. So because we were small, I would get dragged into pretty much anything. Now I work mostly on building out data products internally and externally. On the screen here, you can see some of those that are surfaced for listeners and curators. On the left side, that's a personalized song recommendation module. I work with our developers on rolling out algorithmic song album playlist recommendations throughout our app. And we also like to surface data to artists, listeners, and curators. On the right here, you see actually a recent product we rolled out for our curators, or we call them tastemakers, on the platform, so they can see how their playlists are performing. This is just a little screenshot of plays over the last 7 days on this one specific playlist. But if you were able to scroll down, there's tons and tons of there's tons of engagement metrics. These are some engagement metrics for artists, where they can see where the music's being played, some basic demographics about the listeners. So, our goal is to try to use data to empower listeners, curators, artists, to try to make the music experience better for everybody. And that's broadly what I do there, but I get dragged into basically anything quantitative. So it's a lot of fun.
And also you discuss this in one of the later chapters, the difference between a distributor model, which Spotify, and the direct model, which allows anyone to post their work. So YouTube is probably the one we're most familiar with, but I'll let you discuss that later.
Yeah.
So, Chris, any, don't mean to surprise you here, any, oh my God, who would have thought that's surfaced in the last 2-3 months of looking at AudioMac data?
Oh, man. I think our most interesting data that comes up is out of Africa, because we are such a big player in especially West African nations that I just, we constantly see African artists cropping up who get huge out there and are starting to cross over around the world. And the one thing I always say is I feel like in some point in the next decade, you're going to see an African artist truly cross over globally in the same way that a decade ago, we really started to see Latin music cross over substantially in the United States. And there have been some examples over the last few years, but that's something we see in our data more and more regularly is African artists really beginning to cross over in, say, the United Kingdom or the United States. And that's something I'm always keenly watching is like which one of these African stars is going to really become a global superstar.
I look forward to hearing that music. And I know, Andy, I can't help but thinking you're thinking of a particular podcast, but we'll save that for later. Well, let's go to the next piece, which is the fascinating findings from your new book. But I want to ask you, oh my goodness, what led you to take on the following? But I want to set things up. So this is Steve Jobs in 2001 introducing the iPod. Does anyone here know what the slogan was that he used for this, the first iPod? Anyone remember what it was and what was so cool about it? Chris, go ahead.
I believe it was 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Oh, yes.
Bingo! You get 25 bonus points. 25 to 0 to 0 to 0 at this point. And that was considered amazing. Oh my God, 1,000 songs. But last I looked, and Chris has published the data set that fuels all of his research. This is readily available for anybody to download and revel in, and I've had a blast with it. I know Andy has as well. But it includes 1,177 songs. Chris, I'm going to ask you to explain what the Billboard Top 100 is, but it's every Billboard Top 100 #1 song from when they started keeping track of that in 1958 until the publication date of this. Obviously, that's higher than it used to be. But if people don't want to wait to the end and want to know, where can I get this data? Where can I learn about Chris? Where can I learn about the book? It's at chrisdallariva.com. So I want to start with something which is in one of the earlier chapters, which is teenage tragedy songs. And how on earth did something like that become a foundation of a whole slew of big hits? We'll talk later about, do people tend to listen to sad music or happy music? But this takes sad music to a completely different level. And what exactly, well, why don't you start with why did you decide to delve into this? And then we'll get into the teenage tragedy song. So I kind of jumped the gun a little bit there.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one of those things where if I actually thought I was going to go on a 7-8 year journey listening to all these songs, turning it into a book, and then spending even more time trying to find someone to publish it, there's probably no way I would have started it just because it took so long. But when I started doing this, I wasn't working in the music industry at the time, but I've always played music. I've played in bands, like writing songs. I just concocted this idea. I was like, I'm going to listen to every song to get to the top of the Billboard Hot 100. The Billboard Hot 100 is Billboard magazine's pop chart. There have been tons of charts that have come up over the years that try to track the most popular songs in the United States. Billboard is the one that has remained present for the last 65, 70 years. And they publish their charts once a week. So their goal is to find within a 7-day period what are the most popular songs in the United States. At the beginning of the Hot 100, that was mostly tracking sales, radio play, and jukebox play. Now, I mean, sales are still tracked, but they're tracking streaming. They're tracking basically every way that people listen to music. So it's a good way to find out what was popular over the decades. And basically what I would do is every day I would get home from work, I would sit down, I would listen to one song. I would probably play along with it on my guitar, and that was really it. But because I was spending my days working in spreadsheets, I started tracking some facts and figures about these songs. And the first thing I noticed was what you had just highlighted, this subgenre of songs called, what I came to learn were called teenage tragedy songs. And very interesting. Basically, what I noticed was there were a lot of songs about people dying in the late 50s, early 60s. And not just, again, these aren't obscure records. These are supposedly the most popular records in the land. Some examples are Teen Angel by Mark Dinning, Leader of the Pack by the Shangri-Las. And I was just like, that seems very strange. I feel like the platonic form of a pop song in my head is something that's chipper, upbeat. You could probably dance to it. Like, why are these depressing dirges getting to the top of the charts? And I did a little bit of an exploration on that to try to understand that trend. I wrote about it. I actually sent it off to an English professor I had in college, and he was like, oh, this is pretty good. You should keep at it. And then slowly I just kept going and writing, and a book was born out of it. So it was a very strange, circuitous journey. I could talk, I guess, a little bit more about those teenage tragedy songs. My speculation is that it's really intimately connected to the rise of the teenager as a demographic group. This sounds weird from a contemporary perspective, but the idea of like your teen years being a distinct period between childhood and adulthood was an invention of like the last 100 years. Whereas if you go back further, it's really you're a kid and then you're an adult. But with the rise of compulsory education, with the post-World War II economic boom, you start having everyone going to school, and people in this demographic group are hanging out all day. So culture develops around them, and then eventually people start trying to market culture to them. I think this is an example of something that was marketed to teenagers. These are depressing stories, but they are all about teens. And then when you consider some of the cultural context at the time, tons of tragedies in the first half of the 20th century, world wars and whatnot, pandemics. At the same time, there were also lots of like very famous musicians and actors who died young. So I think it was sort of in the air that these songs would connect with people. And partially this trend or trope goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. Romeo and Juliet sort of hits on this to some degree. So it's not completely new, but I think it's distinct in this period, and that's the reason that it came about. So sort of a long answer there, but that's what set me off on this journey.
And Chris, so realize Chris is not just a musician and a data nerd, which all of us have. If we're not musicians, we certainly have a love for music. But also, I look at you as being as a music anthropologist. There's a lot of stuff that you're connecting these songs and what's happening in the popularity of them with culture activities, political activities, and so on. Chris, what I noted is that you'll have the popularity of a certain subgenre of songs, and then it stops. Okay, you went through this, and there was I think you even mentioned there was 3 weeks in a row where there was a different teenage tragedy song or something like that, and then it stops. And with that in mind, I want to look at what I think is the first visualization illustration that's in the book, and it's this one, which is this infatuation with songs that have the word twist in them. And the first appearance being Frank Ballard's The Twist, although the version I know is Chubby Checker's version of this. And I'm going to ask you to comment on that, but I do want to do a serious shout out to your collaborator on this, and that would be Kaylee Nerney, who did the wonderful illustrations and had the challenge of having to do these in monochrome in the book. So if you could do two things for us, Chris. One is just kind of discuss this trends and popularity and them dying, just going away. And also a bit about your collaboration with Kaylee, because I think they add a tremendous amount to the book.
Totally. I think that this twist trend is a great example. The Chubby Checker twist, or his cover of the twist, sets off the trend effectively because the song is so popular. It actually gets to #1 2 separate times, and then everyone is just releasing twists. Frank Sinatra has a twist. The Marvelettes, who had just put out their huge smash, "Please, Mr. Postman," naturally released "Twistin' Postman." I mean, everyone felt the need to release a twist song, and I mean, this is something we see again and again in popular music. It is the music business. People are trying to make money. So anytime someone sniffs that there is money to be made in a genre or a style, we typically see the market flooded with them, and then everyone gets tired of it and they slowly fade away. I mean, I talk about this, you mentioned it, with a bunch of different genres, but ultimately it's fad driven. And that's how fads work. You know, they sort of rise up out of nowhere quickly, and then it's way too much. There's not enough demand, and then it slowly fades away. This was, as you mentioned, the first chart. And Kaylee's my friend. She's a great graphic designer. And I thought at first we were going to be doing the book in color, and they were like, no, that's too expensive. So we were not going to do the book in color. So we did have to think about how to display things in monochrome, which she ended up doing a great job with. And most of our process was, I obviously put together the data. I would usually mock up a chart in Excel, and then I would just let her run with it. Things became tricky. I mean, like a bar chart like this, of course, is not that tricky because color doesn't really matter. There were some later charts in the book where she had to get creative, where we were trying to show different lines and different areas of charts. As you know, how can you differentiate those to people? And it was tricky. You know, it was a lot of guess, check, revise, send it to the publisher. They send us what it's going to look like. And I think that's really the only way to do it when you're in black and white.
I think the constraint of black and white has obviously forced a lot of creativity because the charts look great. They're crisp, austere, and then just fed throughout the book with enough little nuggets of joy alongside the sort of dryness of the chart. So I think they've come out fantastic.
Yeah, because I was going to give you pushback on that, but you kind of modified it when you said austere. I don't find this chart austere. There's a playfulness to it. Had it just been the bars, but I'm going to ask Jeff and Amanda to pipe in as well. But when I looked at this, I couldn't help thinking, okay, there's the great esteemed author of the visual display of quantitative information, Edward Tufte, and what might he have to say about his chart? And my question to all of you, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, this is chart junk. You know, this is Nigel Holmesian type of work, etc. And Amanda, Jeff, what do you think of this chart and the other ones that are in the book?
I mean, I like the constraint of black and white a lot because I think that it's the reality of a lot of people who write books, and printing a book in color is expensive. As you look at this one, what I like is it brings in motion with the kind of spiral kind of effect. And I think that that's something we don't see as much as we could in data visualizations, is that additional kind of pre-attentive attribute of motion. And you've done it really nicely here with this static representation of that kind of spiral wrapping around. I also just think it's really nice to have the annotation layers there in terms of the comments on the first twisted chart, the last twisted chart, those kind of pieces. And the things that people might not think about, but just seeing like the white fill behind the text and all those other seemingly small design decisions that actually make simple charts really effective and really well designed. And I think when you're working with so few components on your chart, those seemingly small things like the white fill behind the text so your grid line isn't bisecting and chunking it up are things that actually are what help elevate data visualizations and are also really doable for just about anyone who's building charts or graphs to communicate.
Except ChatGPT.
Andy, you know me and my relationship with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
We don't have one, so you can speak more to that if you'd like to.
Well, that kind of nuance is beyond it.
Jeff?
I guess for the audience, I'll just jump in and say Steve didn't invent that term chart junk and wasn't calling this chart junk. It is a term from Edward Tufte in that book he is referencing, the 1986 visual display of quantitative data. And I think what's interesting to me, I mean, if even if you were going to equate it to a Nigel Holmes, what's interesting to me is if you took away a few elements in here, meaning the squiggly line around the bar chart, you'd have a business chart, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you do a bar chart to show the data. That's exactly how you would show it. So I think for me, the first thing that stands out is whatever elements that were in here. And by the way, I mean, this is not something to show your vice president at a company, right? That's not what it was. That's not the intended audience. But I think for me is that analytical integrity, it's the exact same chart we would use, for any other data. And it just has some interesting artistic elements in there with it.
It does break a couple of the kind of decluttering and organization rules in terms of style. And I'm just curious if there were reasons for it, Chris, on like nowadays, I think there's a lot more left aligning of titles instead of center aligning of titles. People have dropped the y-axis kind of heavy line that runs down the side. But I think consistency is what ends up mattering a lot here, in that your charts are very consistent throughout the book and how they apply those different style components. And I wonder if you might speak to some of those smaller, more detailed design decisions around how you set up that style guide with your designer when you guys were building these charts out.
Yeah, the broad, when I collaborate with people, I always like to give them a lot of room to, I don't want to be the dictator for certain things. So basically what I said to her is I want to make sure things are not deceiving, that they're accurate. But I also wanted them to be playful, because at the end of the day, I mean, we are talking about pop songs here. So whoever just said it is like, I'm not presenting this to my boss, I'm not presenting this at a shareholder meeting. At the end, like here, we're talking about the twist. Like everyone's familiar with the twist. It's a fun song. It's a fun little dance. And I think the chart should reflect the playfulness of that without distorting what the data is. And that's what we tried to do throughout the book. In terms of the center align and some other things you talked about, there wasn't too much discussion about that. I mean, Kaylee rolled out some of the charts and I was just like, all right, that looks good. We both thought, we both just thought it worked. And then the goal, as you said, was consistency. It was like, okay, if we're going to center align things here, let's make sure we do that for every chart. Let's make sure we refer to Billboard the same way on every one of these graphics. And that's really what my concern was, is the information clear? Like, does the chart stand on its own? For the most part, they do. I mean, some of them, the context of the book is, of course, helpful. And, is it fun to look at? Because I know a lot of people who are reading this book are not going to be incredibly data savvy. So I think a little bit of playfulness in the book or in these charts might make people engage with the graphics a little bit more. So that was sort of our philosophy.
Hold on, Andy. I just want to finish up.
Yeah, I was just going to show. I mean, for people thinking what the other charts in the book look like, they all have this same style. And then this here, you're talking about cover art, Chris, and this is an example where you've lent a bit more into visual metaphors, but the consistency of the style remains.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah, there are a couple that are more visually playful. That's a good example of one. Some of them, and then some. I don't know.
We're gonna have a ton of them if we.
Okay.
Let me get. So I want to make sure that we get to them. For the record, I love this. Not that anyone necessarily cares what I think. That the added playfulness without compromising the analytic integrity of this. Easy to make comparisons using bar charts from a common baseline, but made it playful, drew me in. Yes, I didn't mean to suggest I came up with the term chart junk. I don't like that term, or actually I don't have a problem with it. I just think a lot of the things that Edward Tufte says is junk, I think are things that enhance and bring enjoyment to the chart. So I love this and enjoyed a lot of the 20 plus charts that add a lot to the book. All right, I do want to move on to maybe 15 years later, disco and the period of fleeting number ones. And I don't know if it's your assertion or driving somebody else's assertion that the Billboard charts were absolutely rigged in the mid 70s. Chris, should I show the chart that might suggest this, or do you want to set us up a little bit with it?
I guess I'll set you up a little bit first. Basically, I started noticing some anomalous chart behavior in the 1970s. The two main things were the average stay at number one got much shorter, meaning that, say, in the 60s, it was an average number one song would be at number one for 3 weeks. In the mid 70s, you see all these songs that are number one for a single week. I was like, oh, that's a little odd. I mean, it doesn't mean something nefarious is going on. At the same time, I noticed that things, when they would fall out of the top slot, would fall much further down the chart. Whereas in the past, you'd only, when you lost your number one spot, you'd fall down 1 or 2 slots. And then in the mid 70s, songs regularly start falling like 4, 5, 6 slots, and some it's even larger. Like a song will fall 12 to 15 slots down the chart from number one. And I was like, oh, again, that's weird. And based on some research, you find out that there was some nefarious or fraudulent behavior going on at Billboard, where the people who were working at the charts were sort of messing with them. And at the time, these charts were constructed by humans. The general idea was Billboard's going to call a bunch of record stores and survey them, and you then use some magic formula to put the chart together. That's, on the surface, not a horrible methodology, especially back then. But of course, there's a lot of humans involved, and there could be human error, or there could be, people could put their thumb on the scale. And that's what we see in the book in the mid 70s. I talk about this guy named, oh my God, his name's going to escape me. He was the head of the Billboard charts in the mid 70s. And basically people have alleged that if, for certain favors or whatnot, he was willing to push your record to number one. And this is where the current era there is the part of the book I'm talking about. And we see you can't go below 1 week, and the average can't go below 1, and it falls pretty low. And then I think, we highlight it there at the beginning of 74 or 75, the first 12 weeks of the year, there are 12 different number one hits, which is very rare. And if you were, say, selling spots at the top of the charts, you would want a lot of turnover. So that's what we sort of investigate in chapter 5.
And Chris, before the end of this episode, I will find out what the name of that gentleman was, who was a bigwig there, and when he died, there was virtually nothing in his obituary, and you draw interesting conclusions from that as well. In any case, this is one of the other charts that Kylie put together in the disco era, and at that point, I think "Hey Jude" was the longest running number one. That has since changed. And then what's going on here? You have the first 12 weeks, and just some of the other charts from that chapter. Love this one, the Disco Wrecking Ball, and it goes with a pivotal cultural event towards the end of the 1970s. It was at the Chicago White Sox, I believe, and Disco Demolition Night. And I will just leave it to other people to get the book and read about this, as it is fascinating. Chris, or anybody else, anything you want to chime in on before we move on to the digital audio workstation and how composing music kind of moved to constructing music, and why instead of having 2 people making some credited with writing credits on a song, you have 5 or 6 people.
Sorry. I'll just say I think one of the things right in the book, and you mentioned it earlier, Chris, is our audience are people who have to collect data and look at trends over time, and it's incredible how as a longitudinal data set, it's actually very the ways the data was collected are so varied over the 6 decades that in some ways you can't. Well, I mean, we're data nerds, so we are going to make comparisons over those decades. But the method of collection, from streaming to purchases to whatever the white guy said on the phone on any given week, that's a real lesson for any longitudinal data set about the challenges.
Totally.
I think that's
Totally. It's one of I don't know if I mentioned this specifically in the book, but as I've talked about the book over the last couple months, I mentioned this a lot, that it's called the Billboard Hot 100, and it's been called the Billboard Hot 100 since 1958, but it's really not the same chart. I mean, back then you're measuring sales, which is measuring how willing people were to leave their home and go out and purchase something. Now you're measuring consumption, which is the equivalent would be if we knew how often you spun your copy of I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles.
Yeah.
So there is the consistency is we're trying to measure popularity. But the way records get popular and the way people listen has changed dramatically. And that's why I think one of the key threads in the book is how does technology impact the way we listen and how people make music. So that's what I try to touch on that throughout, but that's a great point. And that is also just a great point for longitudinal data in general. I feel like I see this online where people try to make comparisons across time when the data is not exactly measuring the same things over time, and it's not always acknowledged.
So I want to get to the next two items. Don't know if we're going to get to streaming because there's some other cool stuff that we want to share, but the digital audio workstation and how composing music became constructing music. If people are not sure what a digital audio workstation is, any of you have a Mac, it comes with GarageBand, and that's one of the more easier to embrace tools that allows you to do home recording. And so this is GarageBand. This is one of the more sophisticated tools called Pro Tools, made by Avid. And instead of, it's allowing people in their bedrooms, in their basements, to record live instruments, but also construct sounds that don't necessarily come from an instrument or come from somebody else's recorded instrument that has been sampled. And it led to creation of a lot of different type of music. And Chris, I can either show the chart that shows the number of people credited, or maybe you want to discuss a little bit about just what happened when this became ubiquitous and inexpensive.
Yeah, you could show the chart first because I think it's good context. This is showing the average number of songwriters per number one hit. And as you can see, for decades, and even if you were to take this chart back further, there's usually two people who write a song. And if you think of any hit songs from the first half of the 20th century up through the 70s, I mean, you're usually thinking of songwriting duos. You're thinking of Lennon, McCartney, Burt Bacharach, and all the lyricists he worked with.
Hal David.
Yes, Hal David, Elton John, Bernie Taupin, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and you can even go back further and further to Rodgers and Hart, Roger and Hammerstein. It was always a duo, and typically the division of labor was someone writes the lyrics, someone writes the music. This is a good question. Does the metric include sampling credits? Yes, this does, and actually in the chart after this in the book, I parse out sampling credits, and it's still a dramatic rise.
Yep.
And I spend a lot of the time in chapter 11 trying to understand why there is this rise here, because I feel like I would see a lot of people say like, oh, people just became less talented. They needed more help to write songs. And it wasn't exactly that. It was that the way songs were composed were changed. And I actually think what Steve said, that instead of composing songs, we were constructing them. People were, since you could record at home, recording and songwriting sort of went together. It's like you were, as you were writing something, you were immediately recording it into your device. Whereas previously, you were sitting around a piano and you were writing the song, and then eventually a producer would get it and would record it. But because of that songwriting and production elements sort of became interchanged. Whereas back in the day, Ringo Starr wasn't getting a songwriting credit for making a drum beat. But these days, if you make a beat on a song, you're probably also getting a songwriting credit. And because of that, anyone who gets their hands on a song during the recording process is probably going to get a songwriting credit. And that's like the biggest reason you see that giant increase in songwriters. Yes, yeah, Beyonce, there's 8 songwriters on Who Runs the World. I think Sicko Mode by Travis Scott, which there were a ton of samples on that song, so that's part of it, but there were like 30 credited songwriters or something.
Wow.
And people were like, what? I think even if you take out all the credits from samples, there's still like 12 songwriters. But it's clear that what we call a songwriter these days is different than what you called a songwriter. These are not people who are writing melodies and lyrics and chord progressions. Again, these are people, this could be someone who's literally adding like a kick drum to a recording. We're going to call them a songwriter these days. So it's another good example of longitudinal data about how if you don't really understand the data, your conclusions could be incorrect or deceiving.
Well,
Amen.
it's also in this chapter that you tackle gender bias in the music industry, which you could have tackled it in any chapter, and you make the argument that it goes back hundreds of years, and we'll discuss that a little bit because it's something that Jeff has visualized to great effect that I'll share a little bit later. But can you tell us a little bit about this and what you've discovered and some of the findings that support it?
Yeah, something in the data set that I track is at the artist, songwriter, and production level, what's the gender and race of the people involved in that? And I plot it a couple times throughout the book. And again, you can go look at the data yourself. But what we see is that while there's basically parity in the performance world, men and women perform very popular songs at pretty much equal rates these days. That wasn't the case decades ago, but it really is now. But women still seem to be excluded from many roles in the music industry. I talk specifically about songwriting, but as you go into more and more of like the quote unquote technical fields, production, mastering, engineering, they're still very male dominated fields. And I focus on songwriting here up through 2014. But like I said, the data set goes all the way to the present. What we see is that women being credited as songwriters increases dramatically, but it's almost always that the woman who is performing the song is the woman who gets the songwriting credit. It still remains exceedingly rare for a woman to not be to be a songwriter but not also be a performer. And what I discuss in the book is this is related to a pretty pernicious bias that goes back literally centuries, that women are great interpreters of songs. Because, you'll see this in tons of really old texts. It's like, because women are so emotional, they can interpret songs well, and that's why they should sing. But they don't have the cognitive ability to write songs or participate in these other technical roles in the production process. This is obviously just sexism at work. But this chart is a good illustration of that, because over the 60, 70 years, you see that women still very rarely get songwriting credits. And this is a great visualization too.
Sorry, I skipped ahead and didn't mean to. I was trying to just highlight something and the clicker didn't work. So at least one woman songwriter who is not the artist. Sorry,
Yeah.
Just trying to amplify that.
Yeah, so it's I talk about it extensively in the book, but you see this in many parts of the music business. I think the next visualization you have is another good example of this.
Well, you talk about the from even really young ages. Some study was done, 5-year-olds, and asked them, well, is this, should a boy play this instrument or a girl play this instrument? But you also cite some data about men versus women in orchestras, and a data set that's remarkably similar to the data set that fueled Jeff Schaefer's visualization here. Jeff, do you want to talk about this a little? I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but a little bit about what we're showing here.
Yeah, this is just the top orchestras in the country and percentage of men and women at the various positions. And so we kind of see at the top of this, we have conductors and players. The music director and the conductors are almost always men. Other positions like violin or flute or harp, almost entirely, women at some levels. Then you get to the brass instruments, and it's exactly the opposite. And to Steve's point, or what was discussed in the book, I mean, you got to work yourself backwards too. It's at what point does somebody choose an instrument? You don't choose it when you're 25, typically. You choose it when you're a kid. And so is it the band directors, right? Is it the music directors at school who are, driving this bias and saying, okay, well, you should be a flute player and you should be a trumpet player or a tuba player, for whatever justification, but clearly it's happening, across multiple industries here, right? Multiple music industries.
And Jeff, as a music teacher, told my mom, you should be a listener. In any case, I want to do a shout out to a dear friend, Louise Barringer, who I've gotten to play with on many occasions. I'm very glad, however many years ago, she bucked the trend and decided to take up trumpet, as she's brought a lot of good into the world.
If anybody's interested, I have a blog post too on that, because I interviewed my trumpet teacher at the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, was the first woman to play trumpet in a major symphony orchestra. So she broke the ceiling there, literally. And I interviewed her and have a blog post on that went with this viz. So I'll put that in the chat.
Outstanding. So I'm going to skip why albums got longer and songs got shorter, and a whole discussion of streaming services. And Chris, I've got to say the last few chapters were as more enmeshed in earlier music, absolutely fascinating, as well as the AI generated Suno. And I know Andy has played with that quite a bit, but we're going to skip that. By the way, these are some of my forays using the data and following the notion that songs were very short in the 60s and then got longer and then got short again. Would love to spend more time with this, as well as, oh my gosh, how is it that Brenda Lee had 2 hits in 1960 and then had a number 1 hit 63 years later? That's nuts. And it has to do with counting streams, but you'll just have to read about this or look at this on your own. I want to get to our favorite music related visualizations, and I should have checked with Andy, Jeff, and Amanda. Amanda, do you mind starting?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Your favorite ones. So
yeah, so my church at Chums, and also my friends and colleagues, know that I am a musical theater nerd. I love musical theater, Broadway musicals, all those bits. I am very excited for Wicked Part 2 to come out. But one of my favorite visualizations about Broadway music and about music more broadly is the emotional valence of Broadway, done by Lindsay Poulter. This was a visualization done as part of an Iron Viz theater competition that boosted Lindsay Poulter onto the stage at Iron Viz, if I'm not mistaken. Andy,
Yep,
correct?
that's right. Yep.
I'm remembering this correctly. And what I love about this is a couple different things that I want to call out, and then I hope you'll go and explore it on your own. It's on Tableau Public. You can click around in it. It is beautifully done with this lovely color palette that focuses on one key metric across many different songs. So looking at the emotional valence score that Spotify gives to various different songs. So you can look at that at a song level, and then look at summary statistics or distributions within a musical, which is a nice kind of bounded group of songs to look at together. Purple songs sound more negative, sadder. Yellow songs sound more positive, happy, cheerful, euphoric. And you see as you scroll down on this visualization, at the top we can see the various different musicals included in the analysis, looking at the overall average score, with Beautiful, Ain't Too Proud, Beetlejuice being a bit more positive, others being a bit more negative. And what I love is that she's added these annotations throughout that you can spend a lot of time being nerdy with the data and looking at all the different scores if you're familiar with all these soundtracks. But she has these great annotations that make the Broadway music accessible to other people too, where you can see annotations like Waitress and Tootsie have the widest range of scores. As you look across to the right-hand side, you can also see that there's information about kind of the overall score distribution by musical type. And while it may seem a little bit austere to start, and you may wonder kind of, what is this showing me? She does have these axes across the bottom that this kind of small multiple panel works really nicely on. And as you scroll down, you'll see additional annotation layers and other information where the data gets more detailed as you move down. So we've got that big picture first, and then details on demand as we move to the bottom with this, again, a small multiple view looking at the various different songs within a musical. And I thought this was one of, in kind of the range of the earlier time when we were doing these longer scrolly visualizations. Yep. And I absolutely love the simplicity of this, the great simple color palette that evokes the kind of emotion that's connected to the data, and the ways in which she's added additional annotation layers that make the insights accessible to everyone, even if you haven't listened to every single one of these soundtracks like I have. So that's my favorite of my music visualization.
I want to remind people we have an after party Zoom meeting where we can explore this more and people can chime in on this. I'm so glad you showed this one. Jeff, can you share your favorite?
Yeah, my favorite, is my mic on here?
Yep.
My favorite comes from a former student of mine. Danushki De La Vera was a student here at the University of Cincinnati, master's student who took my data viz class. Then she worked for me for 8 years, and she's made quite a name for herself in the Tableau community. She's a Tableau ambassador. She founded Her Data, and she built this beautiful viz called the Firebird Suite. Tableau viz. It's playing now,
Yep.
but we put this to music. I was her music advisor on this because she's not a musician per se, but just the complexity of this, visualizing all of the pieces of the orchestra on the left side where they're sitting sort of in an orchestra format, but on the right side a score, if you will. The bar chart kind of filling in as we go along with the instruments. And really gets to be fun toward the end of the piece as we sort of see it come together.
Amazing.
And just love the marginal histogram at the end. This is just making me feel warm and fuzzy in so many respects. What a piece of work that is. And as in the non-sarcastic, what a piece of work. Gosh, I love that. Andy.
Yeah, all right. Well, I feel, hang on, I'm going to share my screen. I'm on a single laptop, so once I do this, I can't see you all. Right, but Chris, I have long loved Number One. So I did a project with the official charts company in the UK when they did 60 years of Number Ones. So that was back in 2013. I also did a bunch of stuff with them on 1,000 Number Ones and 1,000 Number One albums. So this is a visualization of every number, all the first 60 Number Ones in the history of the official charts company. So each row represents a decade. So here's the 2000, and each mark is a Number One. The length of the mark is going from left to right, is how long it's spent at Number One, and the color also represents how long it is. So we can look at the Beatles, and I know Hey Jude spent 8 weeks at Number One in America, right?
9.
Yeah, 9 in the US.
And yet only 2 in the UK, whereas what's the longest one was Hello Goodbye, 7 weeks. So we get cool things like that. We can see Elvis actually spanned over various longer years, and then one of our longer Number Ones. You know, this is another book you talk about a lot. Another song you talk a lot about in the book. Possibly the best vocals of the decade for sure, right? So she was at Number One for 10 weeks, and then wet 15 weeks at Number One. The other thing I really like about this is a trend that changed in the 2000s is that songs went from longevity at Number One, and it was just like every single week a new Number One, and it became very rare for a song to spend any longer than a week at Number One as the industry changed. So here's my take on the Number One history. And I'd love to work with you, Chris, on maybe combining the US and UK data sets somehow and comparing them. That would be fun.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about that after I have
Andy, what I'm most impressed with is that this is something from 12 years ago, and and it looks pretty good. You know, as opposed to my stuff from 12 years ago, which is wow, that's not so great. Let me share.
Yeah, that's secretly one of them.
We can all learn and improve. I think it's wonderful that we recognize how our own work can be the work that we remake to show people how we can be better in data viz, right?
I'm very proud of that viz. It's long been one of the favorite projects and vizes I ever made.
I will try to keep this short as we have a couple more things to do, but this is a visualization of the Ashford and Simpson song sung by Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell from 1967. The song peaked at number 19, but I just love this visualization. It was created by poly-instrumentalist and I guess polymath Jack Stratton from one of my favorite contemporary bands, Wolfpack, and it is a celebration of James Jamerson, the bass player in the Funk Brothers. Funk Brothers was the house band for all the Motown hits, and it is just some truly great bass playing. Let me show you what he did. I'll just show maybe 15 seconds of it. So that's readily available on YouTube. Ain't No Mountain High Enough visualized, or Ain't No Mountain High Enough Wolfpack, and you will find it. The sync wasn't just perfect. There are two reasons you can really hear the bass there. One is it's really hot in the mix, and also Jeff pointed out as we were starting, the visual of it, you can't help but hear the bass because it's accenting it. It is a beautiful way to show that, and it just checks off a whole bunch of things for me. Celebration of Motown, bass playing, Wolfpack, and data visualization. All right, in the remaining 3 minutes, Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot really quickly on this. Okay?
All right.
Top 3 songs. And now, you do this by time period, but now I'm asking for the top 3 songs across the whatever it is, 67 years.
Oh, yeah, that's tough. My favorites, I'll give some of my favorites. I Want You Back by the Jackson 5, if we're in Motown world. No one, I don't know if anyone has done pop music better than Motown. I think Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For by U2 got to number 1. That's a spectacular record. And I'm not even a huge U2 fan, but that's an unbelievable record. And I will go with, I guess I'll go with something recent. Recently, Taylor Swift broke the record for the longest number 1 hit with a song called All Too Well that was 10 minutes long. And I think it was at the height of Taylor Swift mania. And it's a great record. I mean, she's able to hold your attention for 10 minutes, which is no easy feat.
All right.
Yeah.
You know what? Maybe we'll do everybody a favor and not reveal the bottom 3, unless because people will go, well, I've got to listen to that.
Yeah, it'll be fighting talk.
Yeah, we get into fighting. You know what? We'll make that a discussion on the after party. So thank you for those top 3. We'll discuss bottom 3 and the 3 most underrated. The reveal. I had asked people on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. There are a bunch of songs that have accordion. There are a bunch of top number 1 hits that have banjo. There's only one song that has both accordion and banjo, and that is Come On Eileen.
What?
Dexy's Midnight Runners. And if you know the song, it will now be stuck in your head. I apologize about that. Next item is, what is this gizmo? I'm going to end the show with it. It is a siren whistle made by Acme Corporation, and it graces the song Sir Duke at approximately 1 minute and 50 seconds in, when Stevie sings with a voice like Ella's ringing out. There's no way the band can lose. We get the we later, and hopefully will not disturb dogs and people listening in. And Silly Love Songs is one of the most punk songs you'll ever hear. Chris, I'm going to tell people they're going to just have to buy the book for the after party.
Yeah, I do explain it. So,
speaking about the book, here is where you can find Chris, his book, The Data Set, and his excellent newsletter. Please go to chrisdallariva.com chartchat.com and check that out. Also, our book, and where you can find more Chart Chat stuff, you can go to Chart Chat Live or dashboardsthatdeliver.com. Goodness, we have 3 different websites. We have the Big Book of Dashboards. We have Dashboards That Deliver. Oh, it's not Dashboards The Deliver. It's Dashboards That Deliver. Sorry about that. Oh, we got to do the whole episode over again. And chartchat.live. And speaking of Chart Chat, our next Chart Chat will be on December 10th. We don't have a sign up for it just yet, but we will shortly, December 10th, and we will do the highlights from 2025. And as always, please join us for the after party. Go to bigpic.me/party. If someone can be kind enough to type that into the comments, bigpic.me/party. I will start that meeting in a moment. And I have no idea if this is going to work or not, but I'm going to give you a siren whistle. Yes, it can sound like a police siren, but if you do it as in the beginning of the Overture to Gypsy or in Stevie Wonder's Sir Duke, it sounds like this. Watch your ears. There you go. Chris, thank you so much for a great book and being such a great guest. And we will see you on the after party. Take care, folks. I've got to get things started. Amanda, if you could play the outro music. Thanks so much.